Is Uncle Iroh a war criminal? It's a question that's rattled the Avatar fandom for decades, and today I want to put an end to this debate once and for all. Let's look at all the laws on the books and put the forum arguments and Reddit threads to rest. And let me tell you, by the end of this video, you won't look at the lovable old Uncle Iroh the same way ever again. Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory, where we're all just leaves from the vine, subscribing so slow. So I was the perfect age when Avatar The Last Airbender came out. As a 12-year-old kid, I fell in love with this world, and it was one of those series that I was always surprised didn't get a ton of spin-offs or sequels. But looks like that's changing now with a ton of spin-off comics and books, and a new show, and a Netflix adaptation, and an animated feature film. It's an exciting time to be an Avatar fan, and it's awesome to see the series revitalized like this. Let's just hope that nothing coming up is as bad as that live-action movie. If you don't know, Avatar tells the story of a world composed of 4 nations based on the 4 traditional elements. You got the Earth Kingdom, the Water Tribes, the Fire Nation, and the Air Nomads. Some people are born with the ability to manipulate or bend the elements of their home nation, and the 4 nations have lived in balance for countless generations. Well, that is until the Fire Nation attacked, kicking off a 100-year war. It's a great setup for a series and creates a world full of rich conflict, and I'm not just talking about the war. We're talking character conflict as we come to love characters on both sides. Like, yeah, sure, we want Aang and his friends to put an end to the war, but we also want Zuko to regain his honor. And the fact that this war has been raging for almost a century means that every single character we meet has some history in it, and that includes Uncle Iroh. See, Uncle Iroh is one of the best characters in the show, and probably my personal favorite. He's funny, he's charming, and his wisdom is something that we should all take to heart.
Perfection and power are overrated. I think you are very wise to choose happiness and love.
Seriously, it's good stuff.
There is nothing wrong with letting people who love you help you. Not that I love you. I just met you.
What? No, I'm not tearing up, you're tearing up. But under this cuddly exterior is a powerful warrior, a man that used to be one of the highest ranking generals in the Fire Nation army. And given that the Fire Nation is the aggressor in this war and, you know, unalived an entire civilization of airbenders, a lot of people have argued whether or not Iroh is a war criminal. And yeah, I mean a lot of people. Even Iroh's actor from the Netflix series got in on the discussion.
Everybody keeps saying that Uncle Iroh was a war criminal. Yes, he did bad things in the war, but it was war. That's my hill. I'm gonna die on it.
It's a compelling conversation, and one that I want a definitive answer to. So chat, today, we're putting one of the best cartoon mentors in history on trial at the Theorist court to determine once and for all, is Uncle Iroh from Avatar The Last Airbender a war criminal? Protect your cabbages, friends. We're about to spill some tea. So before we can figure out if Iroh is a war criminal, we need to know 2 things. First, what exactly is a war crime? And secondly, what did Iroh do in his past that could make him a war criminal? Now, war crimes is one of those terms that just sounds awful, so people use it as a catch-all for bad things. I mean, what could be worse than crime? A war crime. But the term war crime actually refers to very specific things. A set of international laws that outline the do's and the don'ts of warfare. Yeah, it turns out that not all's fair in love and war. Currently, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, considers dozens of actions to be war crimes, but they tend to fall into one of 4 buckets. First, certain tactics of war are prohibited. This includes the deceptive use of a truce flag to lure enemies into a trap, conscripting prisoners of war to fight, taking hostages, torture, you know, that kind of stuff. As a sort of all-encompassing term, we're just gonna call these dishonorable tactics. Secondly, we have laws concerning weapons of war that cause superfluous pain or injury. This includes stuff like poison bullets or chemical weapons like mustard gas. Third is the destruction of private property or cultural landmarks, stuff like churches, schools, hospitals, museums, or other cultural sites. And fourth and finally, the killing or injury of protected persons such as civilians, medics, prisoners, or the wounded. So now that we know all of that, what would Iroh have done in his past to have made him a war criminal? Well, we actually know surprisingly little about Iroh's earlier life. Like, we don't even know his his wife's name. But what we do know about Iroh is that he was a brilliant military commander. He earned the title Dragon of the West and is one of the only people in history to successfully break through the massive walls of the Earth Kingdom capital, Ba Sing Se. This is a huge deal in universe. As far as we know, no enemy combatant had ever gotten into the city before Iroh.
What about the Dragon of the West? He got in.
Technically, yes, but he was quickly expunged.
He technically got in? Sounds like the best way of getting in. This victory for Iroh came after a 600-day assault on the city known as the Siege of Ba Sing Se. We actually get a brief look at the siege during the Avatar series, where we see Iroh and his soldiers after breaking through the outside wall. We're also shown the army actually breaking through the wall in the sourcebook Legacy of the Fire Nation, which caused at least one Earth Kingdom commander to surrender.
For Zuko, a pearl dagger from the general who surrendered when we broke through the outer wall.
You know, that dagger never shows up again after this episode, and that always bothered me. Regardless, this shows us that Iroh and his forces successfully got into the city, and this entire siege, this is the source of this discussion within the Avatar fandom. Could a military leader like Iroh hold a siege like this and not come out a war criminal? Well, let's go through our 4 categories one by one and find out. So let's start out with our first type of war crime, dishonorable tactics. Is there any evidence that Iroh would be using strategies like a false truce flag, taking hostages, conscripting prisoners, or torturing others? Well, right off the bat, I can say that there is no explicit proof of this one way or the other. I mean, we are talking about a children's cartoon after all. Even one as mature as Avatar is not going to be exploring this. So definitively, we can't say. But we can read between the lines, given what we do know. See, I don't know about you, but growing up, I was under the impression that Iroh was a ruthless warrior earlier in his life. I mostly got it from this, I guess you would call it a joke he made in a letter to Zuko and Azula.
Ba Sing Se must be something to behold. I hope you all may see it someday, if we don't burn it to the ground first.
Burn it to the ground, huh? Yeah, that's the sort of humor that someone with dark intentions would fall back on, right? Anyway, I always thought that he only underwent all of his character growth that made him into the gentle mentor we know and love after his son's death at the siege of Ba Sing Se. That he self-reflected on that massive loss and decided to change and become a wiser man after that unimaginable pain. But if you look at Iroh's actions throughout his entire life, you'll see that that isn't actually the case. First of all, just from what we know in the show, after breaking through the walls at Ba Sing Se, the Earth Kingdom general leading the forces surrendered to Iroh, who accepted it. Remember this?
A pearl dagger from the general who surrendered when we broke through the outer wall.
That general and any captured soldiers likely became prisoners of war and were sent to a Fire Nation prison. Not a good fate, mind you, but still well within international law. But that's just the show. Thanks to the extended universe material, we can also see that Iroh has been honorable for his entire life. In the Legacy of the Fire Nation sourcebook, Iroh speaks about how aggressive Ozai was as a child and how that troubled him, how strong the Fire Nation's people were but that they lacked enlightened leadership, and how true enlightenment is not wanting to grow to be the most powerful but instead to learn from others. And we know for a fact that Iroh took that lesson to heart before he lost his son. Thanks to the official Avatar: The Last Airbender YouTube channel, we have an official timeline of Iroh's life, and it tells us that
he left the Fire Nation capital seeking insight from other benders.
Even during the war, it's clear that Iroh kept an open mind to other cultures. And during those same journeys, he discovered the Sun Warriors, a secret civilization of firebenders that protected the last dragons. It was Fire Nation tradition to hunt and kill dragons to earn honor and glory. But instead of fighting the dragons, Iroh learned from them. The dragons deemed Iroh worthy of their secrets and taught him how to firebend through his life and passion. I don't know about you, but to me, that doesn't sound like someone who would go on to use dishonorable tactics during warfare. So, things look pretty good for Iroh when it comes to his honorable tactics, but what about the use of weapons that cause excessive pain? This one might be tricky for a firebender like Iroh, huh? See, this matters because according to Protocol 3 of the 1980 Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, or CCW, incendiary weapons are prohibited for use against human targets. That means you can't use fire on people. You can't fight fire with fire, so to speak. Flamethrowers or similar weapons can only be used for clearing landscapes or brush. But if you use them to burn civilians, or enemy soldiers even, that is a war crime. They simply cause too much suffering, too much pain to be used. Which I totally get. I've picked up a hot pan by metal by mistake and was crying in bed for the next 5 hours. I can't fathom being hit by a flamethrower. So wouldn't this mean that all Fire Nation soldiers who use firebending as a weapon would be war criminals? Well, not necessarily. If we apply this standard to all benders in this world, earthbenders would also easily break IHL weapon laws. Another part of the CCW, Protocol 1, bans the use of weapons that use fragments that can't be easily detected. See, a weapon like a frag grenade works by exploding and sending shrapnel into enemy combatants. Basically, that's little pieces of metal meant to pierce the skin. That is okay under the CCW because metal is easily detected by X-rays or metal detectors or whatever. Doctors or medics can easily find it and remove it. But if that same grenade used plastic or another material that you couldn't easily detect, well, those same medics might be unable to save someone filled with pieces of plastic just because they can't find them all. In the world of Avatar, earthbenders can easily create similar shrapnel out of stone. And in this world where there's no X-ray technology yet, any medics who couldn't earthbend wouldn't be able to easily detect or remove that stone shrapnel from the injured. If we hold firebenders to these standards, we also have to hold earthbenders, and I don't see anyone out here calling Bolin a war criminal.
Come on, Korra! We all deserve a little rest and relaxation after all this craziness.
But even bigger than that, while firebending and earthbending are never seen as taboo, something worthy of locking someone up just for using them, we do see one technique that is expressly forbidden: bloodbending. In the Legend of Korra, bloodbending is basically outlawed and punishable by the Avatar taking your bending away.
I'm taking away your bending. For good.
But firebending is never treated with that same level of disgust. It's just something that people can do, something that people can make a living off of even. This sets the precedent that firebending alone, even as a weapon, isn't criminal. So Iroh isn't a war criminal for using firebending and causing excessive pain. But that doesn't mean that Iroh's actions were culturally painless. Potential war crime number 3, the destruction of protected buildings and landmarks. Now, just to be upfront, for the most part, Iroh would be in the clear during the siege. The Fire Nation barely got past the outermost wall of Ba Sing Se, and if you look at the layout of the city, there would certainly be no schools, museums, or hospitals in this underdeveloped land just inside the walls. However, this doesn't mean that this is cut and dry. See, just penetrating the walls themselves could be considered a war crime. Yeah, listed right up there with the other protected buildings is, quote, destruction of property that is of particular cultural significance. Basically, this is designed to prevent important or irreplaceable parts of cultural heritage from being destroyed in a war. Think stuff like the pyramids of Giza, the Eiffel Tower, or Himeji Castle. The walls of Ba Sing Se would certainly fall into this same category. They are massively culturally significant to the Earth Kingdom and a landmark known worldwide. I mean, the city itself is named after the walls.
That's why the city is named Ba Sing Se. It's the impenetrable city. They don't call it Na Sing Se. That means penetrable city.
Plus, the walls of the city are based on the real-world Great Wall of China, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a location that would absolutely have this international protection. So breaking through these walls would be pretty bad, Sing Se, yeah? I mean, yes, but doing so wouldn't necessarily make Iroh a war criminal. See, the protection of these buildings isn't all-encompassing, no questions asked. There are situations where they can be valid targets of attack, especially if they're being used for military purposes. For example, if weapons were being gathered in a museum, that museum would lose the protection of international law. Well, the walls of Ba Sing Se are pretty much the textbook definition of this. They're being used for a military purpose, to protect the city that they surround. Therefore, Iroh and his soldiers would be well within their rights to attack and destroy them during a time of war. And all of that goes without saying that the Earthbenders could easily repair the damage that we see the Fire Nation put on these walls in like an afternoon. alone. So Iroh's 3 for 3 for not being a war criminal so far. That's a sentence you just love to hear said out loud. But nothing we've talked about so far matters as much as this next one: the killing or injury of civilians, medics, prisoners, or the wounded. This is probably the biggest crime one can commit during war, harming people who aren't involved with the fighting, who can't fight back, or who are just trying to help the injured from suffering. Any attacking army, Fire Nation or otherwise, has to do everything in their power to limit these sorts of casualties, whether that be avoiding attacking civilians or targeting residential areas. Thankfully, this is something that both the Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom considered during this conflict. When Aang and the others first get to Ba Sing Se, they're confronted by guards who ask,
"What are you people doing here? Civilians aren't allowed on the wall."
It sounds like civilians weren't allowed close to or on the walls, likely for their own safety. Likewise, in both the flashback to Iroh's siege and the art we see in Legacy of the Fire Nation, we don't see any civilians or other non-combatants near the wall. So, given that the siege was called off before they could get very far into the city, it's reasonable to assume that no civilians were directly injured in this battle. But here's the bigger problem. Though sieges like this aren't inherently forbidden by international law, the main concern of a lengthy siege like this is the starvation or dehydration of a city's civilian population. Usually, this is inevitable during a siege. The whole point is to cut off trade routes in and out of the city so it can't get aid or supplies. So, bad news for General Iroh, right? Did the people of Ba Sing Se starve because of his 600-day siege? Well, actually, no. This is where Ba Sing Se's layout helps Iroh much more than it hurts, because Ba Sing Se is so massive that it doesn't actually need any outside food or water. It's got everything it needs within its walls. This isn't like just a couple miles of land. This area is the size of a small country. Just inside its outermost wall, Ba Sing Se has a massive underdeveloped area known as the Agrarian Zone, whose main purpose is agriculture. Crops and livestock are grown here to feed the rest of the city, so food is no issue for a besieged Ba Sing Se. Likewise, Lake Laogai is also within the Agrarian Zone, likely a large source of fresh water for the city. In all honesty, most of Ba Sing Se's citizens probably didn't even notice they were under siege at all. Like, the fandom really loves to joke that there is no war in Ba Sing Se, and that's really not all that far off from the truth. Though that line is all about the culty brainwashing stuff, by the time of Avatar Aang, the innermost parts of Ba Sing Se are so sheltered and isolated from the conflict that the king didn't even know that there was a war.
There's a war going on right now. For the past 100 years, in fact.
A secret war? That's crazy.
Remember, this war has been raging for this king's entire lifetime, and he had no idea. All because Ba Sing Se had the resources to keep the city mostly healthy, even through a siege. So, all in all, based on everything we see from Iroh and his time as a general and the siege he led against Ba Sing Se, there just isn't enough evidence to say that the Dragon of the West is a war criminal. But that doesn't mean that Iroh is off the hook. You see, war crimes aren't the only crimes regulated by international criminal law. They also police stuff like crimes against humanity, mass unaliving, and crimes of aggression, all of which are different things apparently. People are just great. So no, he's not a war criminal, but the awful, horrible crime that Iroh would really be worried about here are crimes of aggression. See, a crime of aggression is also known as a crime against peace, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The planning, initiation, or execution of an act of war using state military force on a large scale. Basically, it's starting a war or battle for no real reason. In the real world, these were mostly put in place as a way to charge the German leadership at the end of World War II. And the International Court came to the conclusion that crimes of aggression were the worst sort of international crime because they were the domino that often led to the other horrors of war. We also know for a fact that crimes of aggression exist in the Avatar canon. In the Legend of Korra spin-off comics, Kuvira is explicitly charged for starting multiple wars of aggression. So in the end, it doesn't matter how honorable Iroh is or how ethically he led his troops. As the crowned prince of the Fire Nation, next in line to the throne and the person leading the siege of Ba Sing Se, Iroh would absolutely be guilty of these crimes of aggression. And the worst part of it all for Iroh, he can't even say that he's being punished for the sins of his ancestors. He actively wanted to continue the fighting and admits as much across the whole franchise. In Legacy of the Fire Nation, he explains that he once had ambitions of being Iroh, the Fire Lord, scourge of the Fire Nation. While in the show itself, he says,
"When I was a boy, I had a vision that I would one day take Ba Sing Se."
He wanted to continue this war earlier in his life for his own glory. So no, Iroh isn't a war criminal, but that doesn't mean he isn't guilty of international crimes against peace. You're gonna need to serve a lot of tea for free in Ba Sing Se to make up for this one, Iroh. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. And if you want another Avatar theory right now, check out our video about why we should end the Avatar cycle.